I never ever thought for 1 minute I'd be somebody who would get postnatal depression. It never crossed my mind.
So I remember sitting on the sofa and absolutely sobbing because I couldn't pick up my baby. And at that point, clearly there was something wrong, but I didn't know what was wrong.
Perinatal mental illness can happen to anybody. It is more likely in women who've had previous mental health conditions, but lots of women develop perinatal mental illnesses who have absolutely no mental health history at all.
My husband said he didn't want to tell people that I'd had psychosis because the association with the word is not good, is it?
Everybody's heard of postnatal depression. GPs are very alert to it, health visitors and so on. What's more new, I suppose, is working with a whole range of mental health difficulties that occur in that perinatal period.
I didn't seek help until my baby was 3 months old, and by that time I was really poorly, and that's because I didn't know that this condition exists.
I'd really like expectant couples and their families to understand that the conditions are treatable. I'm aware that lots of mums are really concerned that if they seek help they might perhaps think that they could lose their baby, or that people might think differently about them. I want to assure them that's not going to happen, and that we have specialist teams available in every area of the country who would be really interested and happy to help them.
I suffered from antenatal anxiety because I was very ill at the beginning of my pregnancy as a result of a very severe reaction to the IVF drugs, which left me ill for 3.5 months, including not being able to walk and in a wheelchair. And having seen how I could go at the beginning of that illness from being absolutely fine to incredibly ill in hospital in a matter of a day, I then became very anxious about how quickly things could go wrong. And the fact that things could go wrong, I then developed a fear of childbirth itself, and worrying that maybe during childbirth something similar could happen, and maybe I'd lose my little one, or maybe something would happen to me. And that fear stayed with me throughout my pregnancy.
This is anxiety that isn't easily reduced by reassurance. It's usually very specific to the pregnancy, so very commonly it might be about the baby and whether the baby's going to be okay. A bit later in pregnancy it might be thinking about the delivery and whether that's going to go all right or not. But women with antenatal anxiety experience anxiety a lot of the time to a very high level.
I would feel very uptight, very anxious and very distressed. Pregnancy is something that people often think you're going to bloom and it's going to be a beautiful experience, and you don't associate having these negative feelings with being pregnant. They talked through our feelings with us. They treated both myself and my husband. If we hadn't have had support from the perinatal mental health team, I believe that I could have ended up having postnatal depression. But because we've been so well cared for and looked after and prepared for the birth, that actually it was much more straightforward for us, and we were able to embrace our little one's arrival and cope with everything that a newborn brings.
The most common impacts of anxiety in pregnancy are premature delivery and low birth weight, and obviously we want to try and reduce those as much as we possibly can. There's also evidence that women who are anxious in pregnancy are more likely to have anxious children later in life, so the reduction of anxiety in pregnancy is absolutely essential for the baby.
I want women to know that antenatal anxiety exists and that there is support out there for them, and that these services, if they access them, they really will make a difference to their experience of the pregnancy, childbirth and beyond.
Typically you'll see women having intrusive thoughts or behaviours that they feel that they must act upon. The most common presentation would be postnatally, where women feel that their babies might be at risk of harm. A less common presentation, but still not at all infrequent, is women having really difficult thoughts about their baby. They might have thoughts that they could harm their own child, or they might even have thoughts about sexually abusing their own child. These thoughts typically cause intense distress for women, and we know that women will not act on those thoughts.
I felt like I'd just been hit by like a wall of anxiety, and I just started worrying really intensely about him and his well-being. I just became flooded by lots and lots of what they call intrusive thoughts. So those thoughts were focused on whether he would be harmed by somebody else or come to harm. And it just snowballed. So once I started to think, I couldn't stop thinking about those thoughts. They became really big. I became worried that I'd spill hot drinks on him. So I stopped having a hot drink. I thought that I might throw him down the stairs. So going up and down the stairs and carrying him became really difficult for me. Pushing him in his pushchair outside, I stopped wanting to push him in case I was going to push him into the traffic. And these are all thoughts that I was never going to act upon, and I knew I wouldn't act upon them. But it didn't stop me becoming incredibly anxious about the what ifs. What if I did it? Or what if it happened? I felt so alone. I felt that I couldn't talk about the thoughts that I was having because as a new mum, no one talks about having these kind of thoughts about their baby. I'd got to the point where my thoughts felt so real that I couldn't manage them. So I felt it was better for me to not be here and for me to end my life because it would be safer and it would be better for everyone else. It wasn't until I spoke with my child's health visitor that I got a referral to a specialist service to the perinatal team where I was diagnosed with OCD. I definitely want mums to know that health professionals understand. I didn't trust that health professionals would understand and that they would think that my baby was at risk. But they were all really good and they understood that I was a mum who was doing her best but needed a bit more help.
I didn't feel like I was able to switch off. I felt like I was on alert all the time. I would worry about things happening. So I'd be carrying Morgan downstairs and I'd fall, or that we'd take her to the park and Megan would fall off something or hurt herself. It was very much to do with them hurting themselves or something happening to them that would hurt them. At night time, I would very often be awake between feeds. My brain would be on wake up, I guess. It would be churning over whatever I thought I needed to worry about at that moment. It didn't seem to matter what was going through my head, but my brain would not switch off.
Postnatal anxiety can be very intense and it's not something that can be easily reduced with reassurance. Women will experience it to a very high level and they'll typically need some support to reduce the levels of anxiety that they're experiencing.
I'm grateful that I got the skills and the support and help from the perinatal mental health team to be able to enjoy my children.
When I got home from the hospital, I became very obsessed with breastfeeding. I started making a lot of notes about how long I was feeding for, what time it was.
Postpartum psychosis is a very serious perinatal mental illness. It typically begins in the first 3 days after the woman's delivered, but women can go on to develop this condition even as late as 6 months after the delivery.
I found it really hard to rest or sleep. I also was saying to people when they came to visit us, get me some sweets, get me some chocolate, fizzy drinks, which was really out of character. I'd never really bothered that much with things like that in the past, and my husband was thinking that's a bit strange. I think when my daughter was sort of 5-6 days old, I was feeding her in the middle of the night. I started to sort of hear noises coming from the radiator in the room. I thought that I could hear voices coming from the radiator. So I woke my husband up, it was like 3 in the morning, and I said, you know, you've got to get up, you've got to bleed all the radiators for me, I'm really scared.
Women typically don't realise themselves how unwell they are, so it's their partners and their families around them who are more likely to recognise the signs and symptoms. What you will typically see are strange behaviours, unusual thoughts. It's a sense that something is not quite right.
And I started having a lot of colour associations, so every time I saw colours they'd sort of mean something and I'd be thinking, oh, is that a message for me? It was similar with the television as well. I sometimes wondered if the newsreader or something actually was trying to give me a message as well, so it all became quite scary. It got to a certain point where I hadn't slept for so long that, you know, I just started to go just a little bit in my own little world. And then things came to a head really when my daughter was 8 days old. In the middle of the night, my husband sort of woke up and thought, well, where's my wife gone? And he found me in the garage and I was like sat on the floor eating chocolate. And that was the point where he said, well, sort of thought to himself, that's it, this is not normal, there's something wrong.
It's a psychiatric emergency and help needs to be sought as quickly as possible. If that's out of hours, then going to A&E is the best course of action.
I was admitted to a general mixed psychiatric ward, an acute ward, and then we got a phone call to say that a bed had become available at the local mother and baby unit in Birmingham. And obviously it was brilliant because I was with my daughter. When I look back, I feel like that's when our bond started, really. I think the major thing for me is to have hope. You can be so low, you can be so poorly, you know, in hospital, but you can get through it and you can get better.
My experience of postnatal depression was how hopeless life could be, I suppose. I thought it would be the happiest year of my life, and it really wasn't. It was horrendous.
Women will feel very low and sad, perhaps struggle to bond with their baby. They might be very tearful. They might struggle to leave the house.
I'd wake up in the morning and I would wonder how I was going to get through the day. And I would sit there and I would think, I've got this whole day ahead of me and it's just going to be miserable and I'm going to feel miserable. I wanted to be that mum who made all the meals from scratch and breastfed her baby perfectly and went to every baby class there was and interacted with them constantly. That's what I wanted to be, but it was unachievable and I was aiming for something that was totally unachievable anyway. I would get up and go out to these classes and put on a smile and pretend everything was okay, but inside I was literally falling apart. I started to feel, what's the point in being here, because I'm just going to feel the same tomorrow. And when I'd go to bed, I'd start lying in bed thinking, I hope I don't wake up tomorrow, because what's the point? I would just hope I wouldn't. So I told the psychologist that I was having thoughts of wanting to end my life. And at that point she called the crisis team to ask them to intervene. With the extra support in place, things did start to look up then. It was a slow journey, but they did. If I hadn't had support from the perinatal mental health team, it does scare me that I wouldn't be here anymore. Mainly because if I hadn't had their help, I don't know how I'd ever have seen that light.
All of the conditions that we've talked about are very, very treatable, and a number of those conditions do have impacts on the baby that can be reduced or removed if women seek help early enough.
I want expectant mothers to learn from my experience that mainly to be aware that they can suffer, that more people than you realise suffer, that you're not alone, and if you need the support, it's there, so please use it.
There are specialist services in every area of the country, and women can access these services through their key health professionals such as GPs, health visitors and midwives. Please don't wait.